Anthony Summers, thanks so much for coming on today. It's great to have you on the podcast, Belfast Real. Anthony, you won your own the Anthony Summers Coaching Academy. You're also a former firefighter who then went on to become a fully qualified councillor.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're sixth dan martial artist under Geoff Thompson, and you're also the author of Fighter, Rescuer, Healer, Inspiration, Action and Change. So thanks very much for coming on. And just if you want start from the beginning, like how did you get into the martial arts, or how did you end up training with the likes of Geoff Thompson?
Yeah, hi Jonathan. Hi everybody. Yeah, how did I get into it? Well, martial arts, it was around for a long time for me, on and off. As a kid, I'd go to judo classes, I'd go to the local boxing clubs. I remember going to a kung fu class, but when that was really big at the time, with David Carradine on television, with the kung fu, I can't remember what it's called, but the kung fu program, which I loved. But I never really stuck at anything. You know, I'd go for a couple of months or a few weeks, and then I'd stop, and then I'd go back again. So it was something I was always interested in, but had no consistency with. It wasn't until I got probably mid-20s, that a friend of mine, we used to train in my garage together. We used to do some quite tough training, mainly just boxing, just sparring with each other and stuff. I don't think we had an idea of what we were doing, but not that good an idea. He was just a tough lad. I've always been into keeping fit and things like that. And then he knew Geoff Thompson. He said, I'm working with a guy who's on a building site. And he said, I know a guy who's just started it was a Shotokan karate class at the time. And he said, do you fancy coming with me? And I said, yeah, let's give it a go. So we went along to this karate class. I didn't even know what Shotokan karate was, to be honest. And then I joined the class. I really liked Geoff. It was a new class. I think Geoff was he was the instructor. There was no black belts. There was a couple of brown belts. When it was quite a new class. So Geoff was just starting out then, teaching anyway. And I just hit it off with him. And stuck with it, really. My mate got injured. He picked up a back injury, and he was a bricklayer, so he couldn't afford not to work. So he packed in, and I carried on. And I trained with Geoff for I don't know how many years. I still see him now. We don't train together now, but he's still a good friend. So that's basically how I got into it, really, Jonathan. By the time I started doing it properly with Geoff, I was probably mid-20s, 2 kids. On the outside, quite confident, but on the inside, very insecure. Had a lot of fear around, if anything happened, would I be able to protect my kids and things like that. So that's why I think I went back to the martial arts and got into some type of martial arts. Even though in hindsight, I probably could have protected them, but it was just that self-doubt. I was brought up on quite a rough counselling estate, and I knew that I could. Well, I knew that I could look after myself, but I guess there was doubts there as well. So, yeah, so that's how I met Geoff, and that's how I got into we started off in Shotokan karate.
For anyone who's maybe watching and they don't know who Geoff Thompson is, always obviously Google Geoff Thompson. I know one of the things Geoff's school was famous for was the Animal Days. Is that right? It was called Animal Days. How did you find that? And what I know Geoff always talked about the psychology side. I know that's obviously something that you're heavily involved in. What was that like, going with maybe like those kind of doubts and confidence to going into that kind of training of Animal Day? If you could explain what Animal Day is, and then what was it like, and how did that affect confidence-wise?
Well, yeah, okay. So, it was always a tough club from the start. There was always a lot of sparring, and then I don't know where Geoff got Geoff was always a bit ahead of the time, So you got to remember, in those days there was no MMA, there was no UFC, there was nothing like that about. It hadn't been heard of. And Geoff came up with this concept, and I don't know where he got the idea from. The only other people we knew that were doing anything similar, and there might have been other people out there, but we're going back to early days, probably no internet or anything then, no social media, or not much anyway. And Geoff came up with the idea of Animal Day, where basically all it was probably like MMA now. But you formed a circle. So we'd form a circle. Everyone would sit, a bit like having a fight at school. Everyone would gather around in a circle. He'd ask for 2 volunteers, but he'd expect people to volunteer. And then you stepped into the circle, and you basically just had a bit of a tear up. You know, I guess at first there was no rules. There'd be a bit of biting and gouging, but eventually people were getting hurt. So those sort of things are a bit too dangerous, so they were taken out. A lot of times you'd start with gloves on, but then if it hit the floor, other people would run out and take the gloves off, so there was no gloves on the floor. You know, I guess in a lot of ways we didn't really know what we were doing. The techniques weren't around like they are now. But yeah, psychologically it was terrifying. It was really scary. And Geoff was really good at, you never knew what was going to happen in the club that night. You might go in, because in the early days it was a Shotokan karate club, so you might go in one night and it'd be all katas practicing for maybe a grading. Then you'd go in the next night and he'd have a big bag of boxing gloves and go, right, we're doing some boxing tonight. Or he'd go in and go, we're doing an Animal Day. You never knew what was happening. Or sometimes if he deliberately wanted to scare you, he'd say, right, next Wednesday, in next Wednesday's class, we're doing an Animal Day. I want you all here. And you could guarantee that a lot of people would be missing. A lot of people wouldn't turn. So he'd do that deliberately just to see who was going to turn up and who wasn't. But, oh, yeah, it was terrifying, Jonathan. My children were really young at the time, and my wife was working, so I used to have to take them to the classes with me. So I'd be walking to the class and I'd be holding their hands, obviously crossing the roads and stuff. But, you know, in hindsight, I think they were holding my hands because my hands were shaking so much. I was so scared of going there. So, but I guess it was all about just turning up. Yeah. You know, another name Geoff came up later for it was forge training. You know, and a bit like putting a piece of metal in a forge. You know, you have to heat it up to a certain temperature, then you can shape it. But the idea is that I've learned as I've got older not to stay in the forge too long. You know, you don't have to keep training like that. You know, we used to train, it was crazy. We'd have good people like Neil Adams from the judo world, who was one of the best in the world, probably the best in Britain for years. Rick Young, you know, they would come down, and as Geoff got well known, and they would say to us, you know, your training's all wrong. We were doing sort of like 90% full on, 10% technique. And they were saying that needs to be 80% technique and then 20% or 10% full on. But that's the way we were then. So our technique wasn't great. Yeah. But, you know, everyone there that stuck with it was quite tough, you know, and quite often that was enough to beat people. And I think that's Geoff's mentality. If you were tough enough and you could keep going, quite often you'd beat people who had better skills than you. That was the thinking at the time. Yeah. So, yeah, it was tough. It was interesting times. And then obviously as that got out, Animal Days, it got quite controversial, obviously the name, and it got bigger, and people would come from different parts of the country because they would want to tear up. It started to grow there, and then Geoff got known in the magazines. And, you know, we'd have TV crews coming down, and you know, they always wanted to see blood and stuff, which used to really annoy me. So I think, well, if you want to see blood, you get on there and you do it. Let's see a bit of your blood. You know, it felt like you were sort of on the show, and they just wanted the spectacular stuff. But yeah, it was interesting, and obviously that was the growth of Geoff as well, wasn't it? Yeah, very much so. I suppose in a way that kind of I said back then, a lot of stuff that we take for, like, literally within a minute. You can Google stuff. You can have training plans in your hand, your phone, on your iPhone or your Android phone. Back then, as you said, there was no, there wasn't. I think like you maybe had a bookshop and you had to order a book, and sometimes you had to wait a month for that book to come. So I suppose you guys were just going in the uncharted explorers basically, and just saying, does this work? Or stuff like that. So it's just like
charting uncharted territory, basically.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, 100%. I mean, I can't remember how you do, but you could see the odd video. Like I said, in America, I think the Dog Brothers were doing like stick fighting, and it looked pretty crazy. They were, as far as we could see, they were the only ones doing anything similar at the time. But yeah, that's what Geoff was really good at. I think just almost being a little bit ahead of the time, seeing what was coming. Because like I said, that was the forerunner then to the MMA stuff and all that stuff now, which is amazing. I mean, the levels are through the roof now. But yeah, it was definitely uncharted territory. But I guess that's what it's a big part of life, isn't it? Going into the unknown.
Yeah. Kind of crossing that. Suppose in a way, because I know you talk a lot about fear, and we'll touch on that shortly. I suppose it's like that kind of training. You're stepping through a threshold. There's that wee voice saying, "Don't go." Like, say you're working overtime or you hurt your leg or something like that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's a little voice. It sounded like a big voice at times, you know. And for me, that never went away. It got a little bit. It does get easier, and that's one of the things I've learned. You know, you're talking about fear. Then there was a lot of pressure testing as well. You know, if you went away, sometimes I'd go away and go to a different. You know, maybe try. It wasn't BJJ then, but maybe say another jiu-jitsu class, and I'd learn some techniques and go. I'd be saying to Geoff, "These techniques are great." And he'd go, "Yeah, brilliant, bring them back." Because Geoff was really good about, people going to, he wasn't precious. If you wanted to go and do something else, go and do it and then bring it back and we'll pressure test it. And I remember learning some locks and things like that, wrist locks, and thinking, these are brilliant. And then trying to pressure test it with Matty Evans and Justin Gray and just getting punched in the face and thinking, under pressure. I'm not saying that they don't work, but when somebody's punching you in the face, it changes everything.
Yeah.
So it was all about, I guess it was about trying to make it as real as possible. But interesting days. And the fear for me, like I was saying, the fear was always there, Jonathan. I don't think it's ever gone away, but I've learned to, in my book, I talked about, where I used to live on a big council estate as a kid. And a couple lived in a masonette opposite us, and they had a big Alsatian. It was massive. Probably wasn't that big because I'm talking about we were little kids now, but and every now and again this dog would just run down the stairs of these masonettes. I mean, I don't think it was a good idea to keep a big Alsatian in a masonette anyway. Every now and again we'd be playing football and for some reason just pick one of us, and you'd see all these kids scarpering everywhere, as this dog just homed in on one of us. And years later, I was always scared of German Shepherds, Alsatians because of that dog. And years later, I ended up getting one who was a fantastic dog. And I trained him so that he'd walk beside me, he'd sit, he'd roll, he'd do whatever I wanted him to do, basically. And that for me was a really good analogy about fear. So there's this thing that I'm scared of. The dog represents the fear. It's still there, but now I've got it a lot more under control. So, so that really, again, it's just a simple way of looking at fear. It hasn't gone away, but I've got it. I've got a lot more control over it now.
And then was that training then with Geoff? I know you went. For anyone watching who's maybe doesn't know what ballet judo was. Ballet judo was the kind of precursor in the UK for MMA. I think the name is from Brazil. Was that a natural progression then to go from training with Geoff into the ballet judo?
Again, that was a bit of an accident, really. The ballet judo started, and we were invited. The guy who runs it, a guy at the time in Milton Keynes. I'm really sorry, I can't remember his surname, but Lee, nice guy. I think he started it, and he invited us to one of the shows, and we looked at it and we thought, well, this is what we do anyway. We've been doing this for years, similar anyway. So. And because it was brand new, the guy and Geoff had a reputation. He invited some of us to fight, so we entered it. But again, for me, the fear bit, I just didn't. I entered it twice, again, which was really scary. I mean, it's a massive audience. It was being filmed for TV in Japan because it was big over there and big build up to it. But again, for me, the fear at that time just. I went into the ring, but but just didn't fight the way that I could fight, you know. And that's the people beat me, they beat me, but I just, you know, like Geoff and that were looking at me afterwards, what happened to you? And just the fear, it just froze with the, you know, that occasion. So that was a massive lesson for me as well. It's one of the reasons now I like to work with some of the young boxers and stuff, the professional boxers that are coming through at the red corner that I'll go to, because that feeling of walking out of a ring knowing that you didn't perform is devastating. I think it's okay to go in there and fight your best and lose. That's you know, there's not a lot you can do about that, or except try and improve your performance. But to go in there and not perform, it's a horrible feeling. Probably one of the worst feelings I've had.
And see, that kind of fear, obviously, on a lesser scale, like somebody going in for a job interview. Obviously, they're not going in to fight, but it's more the psychological pressure. How do you manage that fear? Is there a simple formula or method that someone can use to keep that in check, or is it just something just to keep doing and just sounds like as you say, going to the forwards, it's like you're constantly conditioning yourself to the point where literally you can just block it out?
Yeah, I think it is keeping doing it, but you've got to be careful as well, haven't you? Because if you keep doing it and you keep repeating the same patterns, then that can become, you know, that can become almost installed in your brain, can't it? So every time I step up to do an interview, I panic and I get scared. So again, I guess it's changing. There's a good formula. Performance equals, so P equals A minus I, which is performance equals ability minus interference. So, and the interference is the fear, it's the self-doubt. So really, you've got to work on your thoughts and the way you're thinking. It's all about perception. Because to me, if you can have a tear up in the gym, if you can have a tear up in doing an animal day, then getting in a ring, you know, the ability's there. So the difference is the way you're thinking. So, you know, it's a thing called in cognitive behavioural therapy where they call it's called CBT, where it's called the ABC model. Okay. So basically, the A is, it's a lot to go into here, but the A is the activating event. So the A might be that I'm getting in the ring tomorrow night, or I'm going for a job interview tomorrow night. We'll stick with the job interview, yeah? So I'm going for a job interview tomorrow, and I'm absolutely terrified. So why are you terrified? What are your beliefs? That's the B. So the A is the activating event. The B is the beliefs. What are my beliefs about that job interview? I'm going to go there tomorrow. I'm going to get tongue-tied. I'm not going to know my stuff. They're not going to like me. Then the C is the consequences of that. So the consequences of having those beliefs, Jonathan, are I probably am going to go there. I am going to get tongue-tied, and I'm going to mess up, and I'm not going to perform to the best of my ability. So the thing we need to work on is the B, the beliefs. So is it true that I'm going to get tongue-tied? How do you know? You know, do I know my stuff? Of course I do. You know, where's the evidence that, you know, that I'm good at what I'm doing? And there's I'll gather loads of evidence. So what I'm doing by changing the B, by changing my beliefs, I'm actually changing the consequences. So now I'm going to the interview feeling a lot more confident. And the chances are that the outcome's going to be completely different. I might not get the job still, but I'm going to put on a better performance. And that's the same with getting into the ring as well. What are my beliefs about getting into the ring? Well, I'm terrified. The guy's massive. This is going to happen. That's going to happen. Well, how do you know? How do you know what's going to happen? Let's look at what you've done. Let's look at how hard you've worked. Let's look at who you've sparred with. You know, so if we can change the beliefs, the perception, then that will change the outcome. So that, you know, there are things you can do. A lot of it is continuously doing it, but you don't want to continuously keep making the same mistakes either, because then that becomes a pattern.
Can you take you down a far darker road than what you intended?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So you need to break the pattern. We need to break the pattern. And some of it is just about facing the fear. Just going, right. And it, for me, a big part of it is accepting. There's nothing wrong with being scared. I think there'd be something wrong with you if you're not. There's nothing wrong with being nervous. It's accepting that, and accepting that everybody's in the same boat. You know, they're not going to tell you. Everybody sitting down for that interview with you is going to be really nervous and scared as well.
I think there is a culture, and I remember for myself when I grew up, when I started martial arts, you experience that fear. And I remember asking one coach, and they just looked at me blankly as if to go, "What are you talking about? Like the problems with you?" And it kind of went away thinking maybe there is a problem with myself. But it wasn't until I say you start reading like books like what Geoff Thompson wrote and interviews of yourself, because that's how I came to meet yourself, Tony. You did a lot of interviews on Martial Arts Illustrated,
Okay.
same stuff like that, and all of a sudden there's these people who are doing ballet tudo, doing Animal Day, saying, "Yeah, fear is normal. We all feel it," and that switched it for me. I thought to myself, "Oh, I'm not alone. There's other people openly talking about this." So I think it's as you say, it's starting with the acceptance that yeah, you're going to feel nervousness. That's normal. It's not a default. I think we're kind of hard on ourselves in that way.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's natural, isn't it? It's a natural thing. Fear is a natural thing, and our bodies, we're designed. It's just our bodies are amazing, and how we work and how we think, and everybody's heard of the fight or flight, but that's there to protect us, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you're basically, getting in a ring and fighting somebody, you're overcoming, or you're going against your basic innate nature, because everything in you is screaming, "Don't go, turn the other way, run away." So it's a really tough thing to do. I admire anyone that does it. I admire anyone, and we're all different. For some people, just to go along to a martial arts class or a self-defense class, or to walk into a gym for the first time. I've met loads of people like that get into the gym is a massive achievement because they're full of fear. So, we've all got it. It just manifests in different ways.
And I'll definitely come back to the fear because obviously it's a big topic with the current climate around the whole COVID.
Oh, yeah.
You went on to become a firefighter. Was that just a natural progression for yourself, wanting to help people? How did that come about, that move?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jonathan, because some people grow up, don't they, wanting to be firefighters or whatever, or police officers or whatever. But for me, it was never in the picture. It wasn't a job that I'd ever even thought of doing. How it came about, I guess. I'm a big believer that we're motivated by pain and pleasure. Okay, so we either do things because they're painful, or we do things because they give us pleasure, or both. And my experience is that most people are more motivated by pain than pleasure. Okay, so what I mean by that is when, there might be something that you're doing in life and it's not that good, maybe a habit, drinking too much, or like the example for me that I'm just about to give you, that's why I became a firefighter, was working in a factory, hating it, but I guess like Geoff says, you become comfortable in your discomfort.
Yeah.
So this is uncomfortable, but do you know what? It's what I know, which is a massive part of it, the known. Even though it's uncomfortable, I know it. I can survive. I can get through it. So day by day, or say like drinking too much or taking drugs. I know this is not great, but it's not really doing me any harm. I can cope. I'm surviving. And it's not until things get really painful, like you might go to a doctor and he says, the extreme case, you don't stop drinking, you're going to die, your liver's going to pack in. Or for me, I was working in a factory and I just got to the stage, Jonathan, over a period of time that I got to a point where it's quite a sad thing to say, but I started to hate my life. And I had 2 little kids who I adored. I'm happily married. But I'd come home from work after working in a job all day that I hated. I wouldn't be able to talk for the first hour. I'd be really grumpy. And then I'm thinking, well, I'm falling out with my kids here, falling out with my wife. What's going on? I'd sit in a factory and I'd listen to all the old boys, because I used to love sitting with the old. I'm in my mid sort of 20s here. And I'm listening to all the old boys saying if they had their lives again, they would never be in a factory. And I just think, oh, God, if I hear that one more time. But then I got a picture of myself. I projected into the future, and I got a picture of myself, at 60, sitting there telling some young lad if I had my life again. And I thought, well, hang on a minute, you're only in your mid-20s here. If you could do anything else, what would it be? And I talked about this in the book, you know, and I don't know where it came from, but I just thought, do you know what? I don't know whether I saw a fire engine drive past or something at that moment in time. I don't know, Jonathan, but I just thought, do you know, I'd love to be a fireman. So I looked into it and just thought, yeah, okay, it's doable. It's a tough process. And then at the time, they used to advertise in the local papers. You know, I lived in Coventry, which is the West Midlands. It's a big area, Birmingham, Wolverhampton. And every year they put an advertisement out in the local papers that they're looking for fire people to join the fire service. So I thought, right, I'm going to apply. So I applied, queued up the queue. I don't know, maybe a mile long of people queuing just to get an application form. Yeah, just to queued at the main fire station in Coventry. The queue was up the road. When I turned up, I couldn't believe it. Eventually got to the front of the queue. They gave you an eye test, and I can't remember what else they checked. Weight, height, because you had to be a certain height then. I think that's all gone now. And an eye test. If you were the required height and your eyes were okay, they gave you an application form. But that was the start of a long process, you know. And I went and spoke to a few different people. I didn't know anyone in the fire service, never met a fireman. But I spoke to a few people that knew what you had to do to join. And I think it's about the same time I'd already just started training with Geoff, and I said to him what I wanted to do. So I got myself really fit. I hadn't done very well at school, especially around maths. And, you know, the research that I'd looked at, people said you need to be good at maths. You need to have a decent level of education. So I went and brought myself. I remember walking into W.H. Smith's in Coventry City Centre and buying a little kid's math book that said, the first page was a circle, and it said, cut this circle in half, you've got 2 halves. Cut it into 4, you've got 4 quarters. And that's where I started from again. And in my breaks in the factory, I would be just studying these maths books. And one of the guys was really good at maths, and he would sit in. By this time I was doing a little welding job in a different factory, and we'd just pull the curtains in a little welding booth, and we'd sit there practicing these maths questions. And they said when I got the application form, only 4 out of every 100 people who apply get in. But I think my life was that I hated the factory so much. This is what I'm saying about pain being a motivator. That it was a 2-year process to get into the fire service. And the physical test at the time, I think, was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. You know, they restrict your breathing. You have to run through. You can't see. You have to crawl through tunnels carrying a big barrel of. They filled it with water. It was really heavy. If you dropped the barrel, you failed. And you did a lap of this thing, and then they asked you if you want to keep going. Anyone who said no, which quite most people did, that was it. So every time you came back to the front again, this little voice in my head was going, just say no. I can't run anymore. But the words yes would come out of my mouth. So you'd keep. I think we did 2 full laps, and then on the second lap they said, do you want to keep going? And I thought, I can't do this. But a little voice came out of my head going, yeah. I ran a little bit further, and the next thing they pulled you out. They were just testing to see if you had the willpower to keep going. Which I guess doing all the animal days and stuff like that, I did have that willpower. And that's how I came to join the fire service. But I guess the big thing that I've learned through life and why I do what I do now, Jonathan, is service for me. You know, I did join the fire service, obviously, because the pain. I wanted to get out of the factory, and I wanted to do something that I thought would be worthwhile. I had pictures in my head of me running into burning buildings and saving people and being a hero, and it wasn't quite like that. I did get people out of burning buildings and cut people out of cars, and saw a lot of death, to be honest. But you know, the image of the hero running in and pulling out the beautiful woman and stuff like that that didn't happen. And I think if it did happen, there'd be about 10 senior officers waiting to grab her off you and then they hold the woman up to the cameras, and it's always a senior officer if you ever see these things. They're the heroes. But yeah, that's something I learned. I did want to help people, and I think that job was about helping people. And I think the main reason I left after 17 years, I enjoyed it, was because I thought, well, if I start working as a therapist, I can help even more people. Yeah. So that was my motivation to leave that. Plus, for my kids, I always think about my kids as well. I want them to grow up thinking, you know, that a lot of people get in a job and they just stick in that job. And I wanted to send a message to my kids saying, you know, if you're ever unhappy, you can change direction. It's scary. The fear comes up again, you know, leaving a job like the fire service, pension, sick pay, you know, holiday pay. I didn't have anything to go to really. So there was a massive amount of fear around that as well.
I think that's a very, sorry, I think it's a very common thing, and I know from your own experience, and I know other people, as you said, it's very easy just to get stuck in this rut because you think, I know what's expected of me. I can just do it on autopilot. The money's all right, it's guaranteed, and I might not get anything better. And you just fall, and before you know it, a decade goes past, and as you said, those older men, before you know it, you're near the end of your life, and it's just you flushed all your opportunity away.
Yeah, and you know what? That's okay if you're okay with that. Again, it's back to perception, isn't it? You know, if you're okay, being a firefighter, for example, was a good job. It was okay, and you're right. You know, to the last few years in that job, I could go and do it with my eyes closed. I could have went for promotion, but I just wanted to do something different. You know, my theory on life is that you're here once, and you know, I want to be able to look back when I am on my sort of deathbed or whatever, and just go, do you know what, that was good. Which it has been. You know, it's been scary at times. I've been on my knees at times since leaving the fire service financially. But again, you know, a big thing for me, I've got a lot of faith. And I believe in God, and I trust that He'll always look after me, and He always has. You know, I've got this really strong belief that I'll always be all right. Yeah. And I always have been. Doesn't mean that I haven't struggled. It doesn't mean that I haven't been on my knees. It doesn't mean that I haven't been scared. But, you know, and again, maybe it goes back to the training as well. You know, I learned so much from that. Just keep going. Keep going. Things will turn. When the work dries up, just keep going. It'll come back again, you know, and it does.
And your counselling that you do now, what all does that involve? Who all are you helping?
I don't, again, I guess it's funny, isn't it? Because a bit like Geoff's stuff, people used to say, what style do you do? And like, well, if you can work it out, let us know, because there was karate in there was boxing in there was grappling arts in there, you know, that there was lots of different styles in there. Like I said, early MMA stuff, really. And when I went into the counselling world, it was really interesting because I remember sitting on doing my first course, and all the counsellors were talking about which, you know, and I just couldn't help laughing because they were sitting there and they were having a big debate about which was the best type of counselling. Was it CBT? Was it person-centred? Was it Gestalt? You know, was it transactional analysis? And I was just sitting there laughing, thinking, do you know what? This just reminds me of the martial arts world. Which is the best martial arts? I'm thinking, I don't care. They've all got something to offer, so I wanted to study them all. So, you know, even in my counselling, I don't do a one-size-fits-all. I've tried to learn, even adding NLP and things like that to it. So, you know, I work in any area, Jonathan. I've worked in mental health. I do some mental health training in schools. You know, I work around anxiety, depression, self-esteem, self-worth. The fear stuff's obviously a big thing for me. I've worked in a hospice, mind, some, again, mental health. I do some work for a charity called Niemann-Pick, which is a rare disease. It's quite often kids get diagnosed before the age of 2. They don't normally live past 4, or they don't live very long anyway. So to work with some of the parents that are going through that, which is quite horrific. So I work in lots of different areas. But it's good because that's it. I don't know if I've ever told you this, Jonathan, but I remember going to Rome for my 50th. And I loved Rome. It's probably the most beautiful city I've ever been to, I think. It just blew me away. And I remember going into the Vatican and thinking, okay, I wasn't sure about going to the Vatican because of the wealth and stuff, but it was amazing. And I remember being in St. Peter's and just thinking, and going in these little chapels at the side of it. And the place was amazing, but I wasn't feeling anything. I was a little bit disappointed because I thought, well, you know, this is the centre of the church. You know, I've been brought up as a Catholic. Thought I'm in the, you know, this is the Holy Grail here, and I'm feeling nothing. It's impressive, but I'm not feeling anything. And I remember going in one of the little chapels around the side because it's massive. And I remember saying, God help me to, you know, saying a little prayer, saying, God help me to do this. God help me to do that. And again, nothing, Jonathan. Not feeling anything. And then I remember thinking, God help me to help other people. Wow, the feeling that came over me then, and I realised then that was the message, you know. It's all about helping other people. And when I'm doing that, that's when I feel like I'm at my best. So for me, it's all about service, you know. And you've got to look after yourself to be able to do that. You know, I think the more I look after myself, I call it proper selfishness as well. You know, the more I take time out and look after myself, then the more people I can help as well. So, you know, they say about looking for your life purpose, but I think I've found mine, you know, and that's what it's about for me. That's the main thing.
Because I think it's very easy to go, I want to help people, but you go in to help people, but then you have behind the scenes complete chaos, your own issues and all, and then you're not, as you say, it's like going into like an MMA fight, no training, right? Now, and then all falls apart and you go, what happened? And you go, oh, didn't do any training. So I suppose that, as you say, you need to have your own shit in order before you can.
Yeah, that's spot on, Jonathan. You're right. And I guess that's, yeah, I don't know if you've ever got it all in order, but at least you need to be working on it.
Yeah.
And that's one of the good things about doing the counselling that I found slightly different with the coaching. That the counselling, when you do a counselling course, they do make you look at your own stuff. You have to look at it, and it's uncomfortable. You know, you have to have your own counselling. You have to go on placements. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think the more you work on yourself and the more you know about yourself, the more you can help people. Like you said, if you're going in there with all of your own shit, that can quite often come out with the person that you're working with. And that reminds me, I got into the counselling through the fire service because they asked for volunteers. The government had done some research, and they asked for they'd done some research with people that were doing light or long sentences in prison, life sentences, and a lot of them had obviously started out with petty crimes, maybe like stealing from a local shop or lighting small fires. So they decided, right, if we can, young kids caught lighting fires, who's the best person to go and talk to them? This was the thing, well, we'll send a fireman out. So they asked for volunteers, and the area that I've been brought up in, a lot of my friends, I was quite lucky because, you know, my parents were quite strict and they brought us up quite well. But a lot of my friends, you know, a lot of them didn't have, especially dads. You know, they were single families, and a lot of them ended up getting into, and some of them didn't, but obviously, you know, single mother mums do a great job. But a lot of my friends anyway ended up in prison and going down the wrong path and stuff like that. So when this program came out, I thought, brilliant, you know, I can go and help some young kids and hopefully direct them onto a different path, you know, catch them early. But the fire service, because I volunteered, they sent us on a basic counselling course. It was a 2-day thing. And they said, right, now you're counsellors, you can go out and help all these people. Oh, mate, I'd walk into some houses. I remember walking to one house, the woman's her nose has been bust open, all the windows are smashed, her husband's just beat her up, and I'm there to talk to the kids. And it's like, what am I doing here? You know, most of the time you end up working with the parents, you know, and not so much the kids. But I realised quite early on then, like you were saying, it was like going into an MMA fight with no training, you know, 2 days training. But, you know, so I decided I'd train myself, and that's when I went. I trained. I did one-to-one lessons in my garage, you know, self-defense lessons, boxing, grappling, and that paid for my counselling courses. And, you know, I think it took about 3 years to qualify. So that's what got me on that path as well.
And going into Game Fear, and obviously at the moment with this is with middle of July, 16th of July, you always have to turn on the news or go on social media, and it's just well, you've got polarization on politically, and then you've got the media constantly peddling fear. I mean, I think I've seen one news network, I'll not mention the name, honing in on some bubonic plague outbreak in Mongolia. just push and fear. How obviously I think the first step would be obviously turn the news off and don't go on social media. But what advice would you give anyone who's just literally maybe feeling overwhelmed under the current circumstances, and how do you manage that? If there is a quick soundbite or a piece of advice you can give.
Well, I think to be fair, these are unprecedented times, aren't they? You know, we've never lived through anything like this before. I think you're right about, you know, the press and social media. They love it. You know, that's how they make their living. I heard somebody said to me about, you know, how they look at headlines. If it bleeds, it leads. You know, and quite often you look at the headlines and then you read the article and the headline doesn't fit with the article. You know, that's just to suck you in. And I think at a basic level, you know, as human beings, we're geared up to look for negativity because it's a threat. You know, if you think back to cavemen, cavewomen days, you know, they were surrounded by lots of threats, and it's a way out. It's like if you know, Jonathan, if you did this podcast and 20 people watched it, and 18 of them went, "Oh, Jonathan, you were really great then," but 2 of them didn't like you. I guarantee that most people will home in on the 2 that don't like you, and I'd be going, "But Jonathan, 18 people liked you; they thought you were brilliant." But I think that's because that's how we're wired. Because the 2 people could potentially be, the 18 people like me, they almost don't count, they're okay, but what is it about the 2 people that don't like me? So there's a potential threat there. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I want them people to like me, because they could spread, and you know, they could turn the other people, and you know what's going on here. So we want to be liked, we don't want to be rejected, we want to fit in. So you know, I think our brains are geared up to look for the negative. So, and that's what social media, and that's what, I don't know if they know they're doing, they probably do know they're doing it, but that's what they feed in on, you know. They home in on the negative and they bombard us with negative stuff, and we're watching this all the time. It's a bit like food, Jonathan. You know, if you eat rubbish food, it affects your mood. You know, I have a drink sometimes. If I drink too much on a Saturday night, I don't feel great on a Sunday morning. I can still function and I'm okay, and you might not know it if you've seen me, but I do feel I'm not as energetic. So everything you take into your body does have an effect, and it's the same mentally as well. You know, it's all food for the body. It's mental food, if you want to look at it like that. So I think we have got to be careful what we look at and what we're taking in. We're being bombarded with fear at the moment. They're already talking about second waves and recessions, and so how do you know? How do you know what's going to happen? They haven't got a clue. They don't seem to know what's happening now, you know. So like we were saying earlier, there's so many mixed messages with everything that's gone in. I think that's because they genuinely don't know. You know, you listen to some people and they're saying it's a conspiracy, and they're adamant it's a conspiracy. Then you've got other people calling out the people who think it's a conspiracy, and the people who think it's a conspiracy calling out the people who don't believe it's a conspiracy. I find that fascinating. We're so tribal, it's unbelievable. Yeah. And it's like all the thing going on at the moment as well. This is controversial. He's even saying it feels controversial, but all the Black Lives Matter stuff as well. You know, and of course they do. And what's happening to, you know, what happened to that guy in America and other black people in America is pretty disgusting. I think everyone would agree with that. But I've noticed that when they give, you know, when they're telling these stories about how many black people are being stopped, for example, you know, and stopped and searched, which I've no doubt there's going to be some racism in there as well. But, you know, they only tell you half the story, because how many, when we break down the figures to crime, how many black people are committing crime? And it's, you know, I think something like 3% in the, I might have my figures wrong here. I think it's around 3% of the UK population are black, but something like 10% of the crime is committed by, you know, that percentage. So you can understand why they're being stopped more. I'm not saying it's right, and there's lots of things to work on here. But again, what I'm getting at here is we don't always get the full story. We get biased opinions, and they're only going to give you the story that they want. I remember being as a fireman going to riots, actually in the area that I was brought up in Coventry, there was riots. I think they were racial things at the time as well. But, you know, as firemen, it went on for a couple of nights, but it gradually died off. And I think the last night we were there was more press from all around the world than there was rioters, you know, and you could see them going up and talking to the rioters. And I've got no doubt, I can't prove it, but I'd be pretty confident that they were trying to incite the riot to go, because, you know, they've travelled from London or they've travelled from another country to get this news story. You know, they want a news story, so they'll even create a news story, you know. So you've got to be really careful. And I'd say there's a lot of talk about just staying in the now. You know, when they're talking about second waves and stuff, well, what's going on now? You know, I'm okay now. At this moment in time, I'm okay. It's hard, I feel. So I see it with my mum, Jonathan. She's 85 this year, physically amazing. You know, before this virus thing, she was out every single day, you know, and people would say, I've seen your mum here, I've seen your mum there. She'd just jump on the bus, or we've got a ring and ride thing here where, you know, the pensioners can order the bus and she'd get on it. You know, I used to wind her up and say, you're like the Queen sitting on your little bus there waving to people. Everybody knew her. But, you know, since this virus thing, the last few months, she hasn't been out, and I can just see the change in her. You know, her confidence has gone. I took her out yesterday into Coventry city centre to get some stuff, and, you know, she was clinging on to me, and she was never like that. So, but, you know, especially, I guess, that generation as well, because they were told they were the most vulnerable ones, which I think they were. But, yeah, that fear, you know, you can see it in people. Again, it's back to perception, isn't it, Jonathan? Like we said earlier, it's how you look at things. What's the evidence? If you look at the evidence, who's getting the virus, who's dying from it? You know, the charity that I work for, because obviously they've got to be protected, some of these kids that are quite sick. You know, early on, I was on a Zoom thing with them, and, you know, they had doctors on there. They had specialists from different parts of the world, and they were saying then, you know, obviously the older you get, the chances of kids getting this is pretty much nil, or virtually nil. So yeah, it's perception. It's buying into the fear. What's the evidence? Where's the evidence? But that's hard because you're being bombarded with a lot of false evidence as well.
I remember just years ago I was in London, and I was there for a job interview, and they had this very fancy waiting room, and there was big TVs on, and you were just all sitting together. You all had to do paperwork together, and then they would call you out, and there would be people there to interview you, and then they would send you back to the room, and you go and do another test and all this. And I remember on the news there was rioting in Belfast, and everyone in the room looked at the TV, they were completely fixated, and then they looked back at me, then looked back at the TV, and then looked back at me and said, "Is that the whole city?" And I'm like, "No, that, like," because I recognised where it was happening. Where it was happening was like literally one street. But as you said, the media was completely focused on it. The way it was put across, if you weren't from Belfast, you would have thought the whole city was in full riot. Yeah. But from obviously being from here, I realised that it was only just one street, and it wasn't city wide. And I had to explain, no, if you were to go there now, the rest of the city would be like London. People going to work, buses, things like that. It's just in one area that the media are focused on. But to the people in the room, they were horrified with what they were seeing. So it is like perception and maybe lack of knowledge that kind of feeds into that fear. You don't have the whole picture. So you're thinking that must be the whole picture.
Yeah. You're seeing their picture, aren't you? And they like to catastrophize as well, you know. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on at the moment, isn't there? Like I said, you know, with all the, you know, the Black Lives Matter thing is a big thing at the moment that I'm watching. It fascinates me, you know, like, and how tribal people are, and I think we are. And I hate racism. I think it's, you know, the fact that we're still talking about it in this day and age is disgusting. But again, you know, you're seeing a lot of the stories that are put out there, the false messages and stuff, and how bad society is and how bad the world is and white privilege and all of this stuff. And I'm thinking, hang on a minute, do I live in a different world here? I know it's different for all of us, but, you know, I'm seeing a world where actually most people are doing all right. You know, if you go back over history compared to, you know, how life was, you know, even for my parents, you know, how it's changed, and, you know, all the mod cons we've got. You can go and sit in a coffee shop and have a coffee, and, you know, most of us drive a decent car around, and, you know, we've got our own houses, and you know, it's how you look at it, isn't it? It's just perception. It's how you look at everything. You know, glass half full, half empty, I guess.
True. Yeah. Yeah. It's been, as you say, watching it myself. It's been completely fascinating, bewildering, and just you can see kind of like somebody I know always describes things. If you take like a condor, you fly it above it all, you can see it all. Like trying to get a view of the bigger picture. It's everyone's, as you say, is trying. It's almost like trying to like the old Americans who talk about hearts and minds in Vietnam, winning hearts and minds, and it's almost like you've got these two polarized sides, left and right, trying to win your heart and mind. Come over to our side. No, you don't want to them. Come to us. It's just I personally just switched off from the news the past few weeks. I think I was at my parents' last night and they had the news on. It was the first time I've seen it. And I just had to, because it was just, you don't feel good after it. You feel quite heavy after you watch it for 10, 15 minutes. It's nothing good on it.
Yeah. And I'd agree. I'd say that's the best thing to do, Jonathan. I mean, I personally think, okay, switch on, watch the headlines. I'm really old-fashioned. I just flick on teletext now, so I can just flick through and people say to me, you still use teletext? Yeah, I'm old-fashioned, but with teletext, I can just see the headlines. Yeah. And then I'm not listening to the news reporters. I'm not listening to their opinions. I just see, I guess you are in a certain way because you're reading it. I just see the main things going on in the world. I look at the sport, you know, the football and stuff, and then just turn it off. And then I'll watch, I don't know, a YouTube video on someone, Maslow or Carl Rogers or Jordan Peterson or somebody like that. And I'll get a lot more out of watching that instead of sitting and watching the news for half an hour, which just repeats itself. I think one of the news is Sky, I think they actually boast about repeating the same news every 15 minutes. Or why do you want to listen to the same news every 15 minutes? Something happens and they tell you the headlines, so you've got it. Then they send a reporter, you know, from the actual place that it happened, and then they send another reporter. They're all telling you the same story, by the way. This is where he lived before, you know, and then you're getting like 3 or 4 versions of the same stories that you told me at the beginning. So, you know, it just keeps repeating itself. And I think with the left and right stuff, you're right, Jonathan. You know, both I see people just getting encamped and locked in their own, you know, whether it's left or right or whatever it is, they're not listening to each other, you know, and they don't want to listen to each other. And if you say something they don't like, they crucify you, you know, especially over social media. That's why, you know, even me mentioning the Black Lives Matter thing here today, you know, of course they matter, but I'm just saying, if you say anything that some of these people don't like, they'll destroy you. But I think for me, if you go too far to the right, you get, you know, history teaches us, you get the likes of Hitler, you know, and if we haven't learned from, I mean, I went to Auschwitz a couple of years ago. It's horrendous and emotional, you know. So if we go too far to the right, we're going that way. If we go too far to the left, and I'm talking about extreme here, but you've got Stalin, you've got Mao, you've got Khmer Rouge. They killed even more people than Hitler, so which we're often not told about. So we need to be in the middle somewhere and just like listening to both sides, but somehow let's stay in the middle or close to the middle and be careful that we don't drift too far to the extremes.
No, absolutely. It's crazy how where it's got, and as I said, it's got the point. You said people are quite entranced. You've got like especially in America, I think there was a few government shutdowns where literally they just couldn't come to an agreement. So the government, I think, funding. I can't remember the specifics, but I think it was they couldn't agree on things. So the government was just shut down for I think it was last January or something. And then government employees went for a month or two with no money because they couldn't agree on some budget or something like that. There, so it has real world, I think, consequences. What's going on online translates to real world entrancement. It affects obviously ordinary people, and in that case, obviously people's income. Going, and I know we're pushed for time today. Just want to touch on, you do the self-defence training with Matty Evans, isn't that right?
Yeah, we were doing the thing is, when Matty's injured at the moment, he had a motorbike crash, quite a bad one, and he's on the mend now. But he had shattered fibula, tibia, broken ankle or fractured ankle, fractured wrist. But he's pretty much, hopefully, within the next few weeks, he'll be back. Matty was in lockdown months before all the lockdown started because he couldn't do anything. So he's been all right with it. He's saying, I'm used to it, you know. But yeah, we were combining some self-defense stuff with some psychological stuff. So we'd mix the classes up. So because to me they fit together anyway. You know, I learned, like, say for example, when you're grappling, someone's on top of you and you're in a really difficult situation and they're all over you. You're struggling to breathe. Your natural instinct is to turn away. Yeah, because that's what everything's screaming at you. Get away from here. But obviously, anyone who's ever grappled knows it's probably the worst thing you can do. Turn away. You actually need to turn in, which goes against the grain, because we're actually saying sometimes when you face, when you've got a fear, you need to actually, like we were saying earlier, you need to face it instead of running away from it, because running away just makes it worse. It will just be waiting down the line for you. And plus you're programming your brain, whenever it gets scared, I'll run away. Yeah. So, so we use things like that. So, say, for example, it's one of the lessons that we learn from grappling. You have to do the opposite sometimes. It's like, say someone's depressed, someone's really down. A friend of mine recently just went through some horrific things, and, I kept messaging him, and because we used to run together, and I'd say to him, come on, let's go for a run. Nah. And eventually, after a couple of weeks, he went for a run yesterday, actually. And he said, I'm so glad I came with you. That was just brilliant. We just did like a 3-mile run, but we were chatting. It got him out, but he just wanted to stay in bed. So it's that thing, instead of sometimes you have to turn in and do the things that you don't want to do in life. Or, another example, you go to throw a right cross at somebody and they move. So you've got to change the angle of your punch. That's the same thing, maybe you're setting a goal in life. You set a goal, but things change. So can you adapt your goal? Can you adapt the way you get there? So we try and take the messages that we learn from all our training, 30 odd years of training each, and apply it to a sort of like psychological model as well. And the feedback we got was really good. It's just a shame at the moment. I don't know how it's going to go now, because obviously you've got social distancing and that. So, how we're going to get, when them courses will start again, I don't know. I've had quite a few people asking me, when can I book on a course? And so I don't know what's going to happen, how it's going to work, but hopefully they'll be back sooner rather than later. So that's what we were doing with them, Jonathan.
I remember when I was over training with you nearly 10 years ago, I remember you telling me about one of the key things for self-defense was, you mentioned awareness, and you talked about this lady that you trained. Could you touch on that just quickly? She was the lady was at a bus stop, and the guy grabbed from behind.
Yeah, well, that was a friend of mine, Justin Gray. It was a great lad, but rough as they come. He was asked to go and train at a really posh gym close to us, and this area is where all the pilots live from Birmingham Airport, and doctors, and it was quite a posh gym. And he wouldn't go. He goes, there's no way I'm going over there. Will you do it? So I went across. I like to think I can fit in with, whether it's, I've worked in probation service with lots of different people in prison, and I've worked with other people that drink with Prince Harry and people like that. So I like to think I can mix anywhere, and I just accept people how they are. I'll really work on that. I try and see good in everybody, and that really helps me. So I went across to this gym anyway, and this lady came and she wanted a private lesson. I remember it now, Jonathan. Yeah, she wanted a private lesson, and she said, they introduced us, the guy who ran it, and she said to me, Tony. I said, well, how can I help you? She said, Tony, I want to learn how to break somebody's legs. And straight away I'm thinking, whoa, hang on a minute. What's this about? I don't know how to break anybody's legs. I probably could, but I'd have to really think about how to do it. It's not something I'd do, at the drop of a hat. So I got talking to her, and I thought, I need to find out where this is coming from. And to be fair, she was going through a breakup of a marriage, and I think there'd been some domestic violence in there. But she was telling me about an incident. She said where it came from originally. She was standing at a bus stop years ago when she was a lot younger. And she said, this guy just came out. She said, I'm standing at a bus stop. I'm minding my own business, just waiting for the bus to come. And this guy came out of nowhere, which I've never met a human being yet that can appear out of nowhere. But apparently this guy just appeared out of nowhere, grabbed her from behind, put his hand over her mouth, started to pull her backwards, obviously trying to pull her away. And she fought like mad, and she got away from him. And straight away I thought, what she needs here is not to learn how to break somebody's legs. It's to actually start practicing being aware, because this guy couldn't have just appeared out of nowhere. She's obviously, so the awareness stuff for me is massive. You know, if I'm aware of what's going on, they say that 95% of people are switched off for 95% of the time. And if you don't, you know, I always say to people, if you don't believe me, just people watch. People are walking around on their phones, they've got their heads down, they've got their earphones in, you know, so the awareness, and then something happens and they go, where did that come from? So the awareness stuff for me is massive. And that works on, you know, being aware of what's going on inside me as well. You know, being aware of, you know, being aware of our intent. I remember going out, I'm not proud of this, Jonathan, this is a few years ago, but I remember going out and having a day where I wound about 3 people up in my car, you know, by bibbing my horn at them, just in different circumstances. And all 3 of them, different people, you could see them like wanting to get out of their cars and have a go at me. And I remember thinking afterwards, what's wrong with people? I was only having a laugh. But when I look back, actually, underneath, I was actually not having a great day. So on the surface, I was saying, I'm only having a laugh, I'm winding people up. But underneath, I was a little bit angry and a little bit frustrated. So my real intent was to wind them up. But on a surface level, it was just like, what's wrong with you? I'm having a laugh. So that's, again, being aware of what's going on, you know. So people have always said to me, you know, about being humble. I'm quite, which sounds bad talking about it, a bit of a contradiction, but, you know, but that humility I've learned sometimes can be, well, I don't really put myself out there because I'm scared to put myself out there, and I'm hiding underneath this mask of humility, you know, and I like humility. So it's being aware of what's really going on and having that ability to question yourself, and you know, and it can be quite painful as well.
Yeah.
It's the fear coming up in a different way. So yeah, the awareness stuff on every level, on a physical level, psychological level, spiritual level as well. You know, I believe that we're being given signs all the time, but most people are just not aware of it. I remember going to a spiritualist church years ago. I only went a few times, but it was quite interesting, where they would talk to, you know, the spirits and stuff. And I remember somebody questioned the guy who was running it, and he said, God, it must be so frustrating for these people that are on the other side, you know, these spirits. He said, what do you want them to do? Hold a big banner up above their heads going, I'm here, I'm trying to give you a message. It just made me laugh, you know, whatever your beliefs are, it just made me laugh. So I think, you know, the awareness stuff applies on all levels, yeah, physical, emotional and spiritual.
If somebody, because I know obviously we're running out of time, if people want to start, because I know obviously like we mentioned earlier, you're bombarded social media. You get social media companies have designed their platforms to make sure it's almost addictive as gambling. So you're going back to look at updates or comments. Where would be a good place for people to start that journey of being more switched on or more aware?
What do you mean with social media? You mean
just with themselves, or being more aware of what they're thinking, how they're. I know it sounds really stupid. People go, well, I know what I'm thinking, but as you mentioned, there's sometimes we kind of we trick ourselves. Oh, I'm feeling okay today, but down you're not. Where's a good place to start with that kind of verse? I know that's maybe tricky question.
Yeah, I guess. Well, there's lots of different ways. I mean, talking to somebody else, because you can't always see it yourself. And sometimes it's good to talk to somebody else. I mean, obviously I'm biased because I do this work, but I think everybody should go and talk to somebody at least once a month, because they'll hold a mirror up to you and make you question, right, so that's what's really going on here. I didn't see it. When you're in it, our eyes are designed, if you think about it, we're designed to look out, you know, we're looking around, we're always looking forwards. We're not so good at looking in. So, you know, there's lots of books out there, and YouTube stuff and video, you know, all around coaching and counselling, and listening to some of the old, you know, Carl Jung. Jordan Peterson at the moment is blowing me away. He's a Canadian psychologist. That guy's stuff he's getting a massive following, especially amongst men. And I think he's brilliant. He's really good. Let me just put this on here, John.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, it's all right. Just coming on low power mode on my phone. So, but yeah, there's lots out there, Jonathan.
All right. Just to wrap up, if people wanted to, or sorry, actually, I've one more question to ask. What would be probably the most singlest, best piece of advice or knowledge that you picked up in your years, the past few years, that you maybe want to pass on to people?
God, that's a hard question. There's so many things, Jonathan. I don't know. I don't know. I often think if I could talk to a younger version of myself, what would I tell him? And I think I would tell him, believe in yourself. You're much better than you give yourself credit for. And I see people come to see me all the time, and I've done loads of courses with people, and people are amazing. People just never cease to amaze me, but they just don't see what they've got. So, you know, and I don't know whether that's a societal thing, the way we're brought up, conditional thing, but actually, you know, I'd say to people, you're a lot better than you think you are. You've got a lot more talent than you think you are. You know, start believing in yourself. You know, and it depends what you want to do. If you want to have a big effect on people, it's about helping people. Service for me is massive. You know, if you look at the most successful people in the world in any field, whether it's spiritual or whatever, they've always helped other people. You know, so yeah, believe in yourself.
Yeah,
you're a lot better than you think. That's what I would say to people. You've got a lot more skills and a lot more talent than you think. And for me, that goes back to spiritual stuff as well, back to God. If, you know, we've all got that divine spark in us. And if we've got that divine spark in us, use it. Because nothing's bigger than that. And everybody's got that. And that's what I see in people. I see that divine spark. You know, you've got so much talent out there. It's all waiting for you. Or, you know, everything's out there waiting to be explored. Tap into that divine spark.
That's great. No, definitely, because I think we do, even myself doing this, you do kind of put yourself down, who you to do this, who you to...
Yeah.
Yes, and
it's that old saying, who you're not to do it, isn't it? You know, which sounds easy.
Oh, definitely. If people want to get in touch with you, whether to do the self-defense course, or counselling, or even any guys who even compete professionally or amateur, want to get some advice in dealing with fear, etc., how do they contact you?
Well, I've got a Facebook page. I've got a Facebook group, Embrace Your Fears, which people can join. Embrace Your Fears. My website's www.anthonysummers.com. Summers is SOMERS.com. My email is Tony, Tony, Tony@tonysummers.com, and I'll always get back to people. You know, so they're probably the best ways to get in touch with me.
And also to say to people, if I'd recommend you also did a film, was it Embrace Your Fears?
Yeah, if people want my books are only on Amazon now. I've got no paper copies left, so you can download it off Amazon. If people want the DVDs, Embrace Your Fears, which you've had, and the self-defense DVD I did with Matty, both of them really good. You can download them off our site, which is the Real Combat System site, and that's www.realcombatsystem.co.uk. And you can download both videos on there.
That's grand. I'll include the links in the video description below, so we'll want to get this all done and up on YouTube, so anyone can go on those links and get back to you. Tony, thank you very much for your time today. I'm sorry, I know you have to get on.
Oh yeah, I've got
time, but I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your knowledge and your experiences.
No, thanks, Jonathan. Always great to speak with you, mate, and see you again. So thanks everybody for listening.
No, thank you, Tony. Thanks.